So this video will be introduction to HTML for JavaScript developers who will be specifically doing HTML5, although technically it doesn't really matter that much. So to be able to follow this tutorial, you need some sort of text editor and you need a browser. I will be using Visual Studio Code as a text editor. You can download it by going to code.visualstudio.com. It's available for a Mac, Windows, and Linux. You can download and install it on any platform you need. If you're on Chromebook, I believe you can install Linux on Chromebook and then install Visual Studio Code on that as well. Just go ahead and download it. Just double click on it, run the installation. It's pretty straightforward. Once you have it all installed, you open Visual Studio Code. It should look similar to this. And here you can go ahead and get started. So for a browser, you can really use pretty much anything. I suggest going with either Firefox or Google Chrome, which would probably make your life easier. In my case, I have a folder here. I've called my folder HTML5. You can just create a folder anywhere on your computer. Make sure you give it a proper name, wherever it is. Now I need to open that folder in Visual Studio Code. So to do that easily, I can simply just take this folder and drag and drop it to this left panel where it says open folder. And now it's gonna open that folder. You could also go under File, Open, and just open the folder. Just open the folder. When you do open it, you should see that folder name showing up here on the left top. This is now your Explorer window. That's basically like the same thing as Finder or File Explorer if you're a Windows user. Now in that HTML5 folder, if I go in, see there's nothing in here. It's an empty folder, which is the same thing that we get here. It's an empty folder. So to start with our HTML, I'm gonna roll over this left area here, go here and click on this little plus icon to create a new file. And it's gonna ask me the file name. So I'm gonna type learn.html. It could be any file, just make sure you do .html as an extension. I'm gonna press enter, and now we have that file. I'm gonna close this welcome thing. I don't need it. And this is where we can create our HTML. You can do command plus, command minus, or control plus, control minus to zoom in and zoom out here. And now we can get started with our HTML. So in HTML, we have HTML tags. So an example of an HTML tag, it would be something that looks like this. I have this bracket opening, and see this bracket right here, the second bracket on the right side is closing. This will be an HTML tag opening, and you see there is the name, I called it tag, and then there is the closing of that same tag that has the same name, and it has the same sort of syntax, but it has this little slash that indicates this is the closing tag for this. These tag names will usually change. So one of the most common tag names you'll see on any website would be, for example, HTML. And that would be the main wrapper around your website. Now, this is a type of tag that we call a container. A container is a type of tag that has opening and it has closing. And that means in the middle here, it can contain things. So we can put things in the middle of that HTML. So for example, I can go here in the middle and just add another tag like head, and see now this HTML contains this head tag in it. So head, see, is also a container because it has an opening and closing, which means it could have things right here in the middle. So that's also a container. I'm gonna go here and do also body tag. And by the way, in this software, you don't really need to do like this opening and type body and then close. And as you can see, it does the closing for you. But a lot easier to get this done is to just type body and hit tab key on your keyboard. And it's just going to do opening, closing, do the tags and all of that stuff. So anyways, I have body, I have head. So I'm going to add a couple of other elements here. H1. So H1 stands for our main heading. I'll go below and do a P tag. That's our paragraph tag. In HTML, I'll do another P tag so you can see how that works. And do a couple of pieces of text here. So I'll do. So now you can see how I'm adding some text in the middle of this opening and closing tags. And because that's a container, like P stands for paragraph, H1 heading 1. So those are all containers, they contain things. And now they can also contain text. Now in this case, see H1 contains this text that says some text here. Body in its turn contains all of these. All right, so very quickly, I'm gonna just take a look at what this looks like. So to do that, I need to first save this file. In this software, if you look, there's this round circle on top. That's basically indicating that this hasn't been saved. So I can save it by going File, Save, or simply pressing Command S or Control S, which is what I'm gonna do, and that's gonna save the file. Now I can open that file. So you could open that file many different ways. A common way, for example, especially when you're starting, you'll go to your folder and open that HTML file. Double click on it. That should open in my default browser. In my case, that's Firefox, as you can see. So there we go. So this is that heading 1. We have a paragraph. We have another paragraph. So currently, every tag I did in this particular case is a container. They have opening, they have closing. Let's do a tag that's not a container. So an example tag for not a container would be, for example, a break tag. So for example, if I go here after this smaller text and then do BR for break, see, break is a tag that doesn't have opening and closing, so it's not a container. Some people will also call these like void tags. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So the point is, it doesn't have opening and closing, so it cannot contain things in the middle of its opening and closing. So break, for example, if I save this and just go back and reopen or just refresh this, I should see that it basically just pushes that text to the next line, because that's what breaks do in HTML. So that's our BR tag. You should only use break tags in the middle of text. So if you have other elements you're trying to push to new lines, break is not really the way to do it. This should only be used in proper HTML in cases when you just have text and you're trying just to push to the next line. And see the difference? Like I have these two paragraphs. There is this big space in between because it's a paragraph. Now with a break, you don't get that space. So this is similar to just doing like Shift Enter if you're using some sort of Word document or Google Docs. Let's understand what is an attribute. So all tags in HTML can have an attribute. So attributes are assigned to the starting part of the tag. So for example, see there is this H1 opening and H1 closing, right? You assign the attribute to the opening part here. So the way you do it, you go here right before this closing bracket, you do space, and then here you do the name of the attributes you're trying to assign to this tag. So for example, let's say I'm going to use lang, which is our language attribute, and then I'll do en for English. So this will be an attribute lang, language attribute. We're assigning that attribute to this h1 tag. Another thing to notice here is that attribute is just this part. Now that attribute can have a value, and in this case it does have a value. So you can see how it says equals and en in quotations. So that en is the value for this attribute right here. So this is a very common syntax you're gonna see. So that attribute equals to value in quotes. So the same tag could also have multiple attributes. So for example here, if I hit a space, I can do ID attribute and just say title. Let me actually resize this to make this smaller so you can see this whole thing. Save this. So now I have h1 tag, which has two attributes assigned to it. One is this attribute, the language attribute. The second one is this ID attribute. And both attributes have values. So the value for language attribute is en. The value for ID attribute is title. And again, like I said, attributes could be assigned to any tags. So I can go to this paragraph tag and assign an attribute to that as well and do this. So now I have this attribute assigned to this p tag. You can also assign attributes to non-container type of elements. So for example, this break could also have an attribute. You go inside of that tag, and before this closing, you hit a space, and I can do ID, and I can say equals to whatever it is in quotes. So there it is. These attributes are not going to be visible when I open the page. So if I save this and go back and just take a look at this to see what happened, you see nothing. So they're not really visible to the end user in a way. You do have to keep in mind that HTML is public. So even though it's not visible to the end user, they can still access that and see what the code of your HTML is. So I can anytime go here, right click, for example, if I'm using Firefox in this case, do view page source, and you can see it's the same kind of HTML stuff I had. I'm going to close this for now. We don't care about it. Let's add a few more things. You could have multiple sizes of headings. So headings go from H1 through H6. So H2. And then you can have H3, H4. And it goes all the way up to H6. There is no H7. So generally speaking, it should be just the size and the importance of the heading. H1 being the largest and the most important, and then it will just decrease in size and also be less important of a heading. Let me just go back so you can see what's going on here. Now we should have, see, there's the big one, there is a little smaller one, there's a smaller one, and you could have multiple large headings on the same page. So I can go here after the H4 and do another H1, which should be big one again. So if I save this, go back and reload, see here's another H1, which is matching the size of this H1 on top. Getting back to this, you can also make things bold by putting that inside of B tag like this. So anything inside of B tags will be bolder. So right now, if I reload this, see this is bolder right here. You can make it italic or whatever people call that. That's our I tag. I'm gonna get, see that, like the tilted sort of text. There is a second way of doing this, and there's also like going back and forth, which is the right, which is the wrong way of doing that, which is, I'm just going to copy that line and show you. So you can also do strong, that same bold effect, and EM is going to give you the same as the tilted text effect right here. So if I save this, go back, reload, you'll see that. Let me go and check what I did. I didn't type strong, right? Did I? Okay, I did it for the closing. So let's go check. If I reload this, see, this looks pretty much exactly like this one. But in our HTML, you'll see that I'm using B tag for bold here, strong here for bold again, and then I here and EM here. So you get kind of the same effect, although you can make them look different if you want to with CSS. And people will always tell you like this one is right, this one is wrong to use, but who cares? Moving on, let's add a couple of other things. Let's do an image. So to add an image tag, you use img. As a matter of fact, I'm going to just start from like the scratch here. Just do img right here. That's our image tag. See, that's similar to break. It doesn't have opening, closing, not a container. And it does have attributes. So one of the attributes is src for source. And that should be the source image. So you should put whatever image should be showing up in that position. So right now, if I save this, go back and look, there is going to be no image. Yeah, big surprise. So to have an image, you actually have to have an image. So image is not really being placed in HTML. You're just linking to the image that should be showing up in this position. So let's try to do that. I'm going to go grab an image really quickly. So let me just copy here something. I'm going to paste it here. There's my image. I'm just going to rename it because it's just too long. There's my image. So now I'm going to go back. That image should show up here. Now, because that image is located in the same folder as my HTML file, that's going to be a relative path for me. So I'm just going to go something like that. So you should do the name of the image and the extension. So for me, that extension is .jpg. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to save this, go back and reload. See, now we have that image showing up in that particular position. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. Going back to this. So if that image is not located in the same folder, so in this case, see, they're both in the same folder. Sometimes it could be in an inner folder. So if I do a new folder and do img, I'm going to take this file and move it to that img folder. So now it's inside of that folder. With this change, this is no longer going to work. So we need to show the path to that image. So I'm going to do the folder name / because there's that folder img, and then the file name after that. So if I save this, that should work again. There's our image, all good. What if there was another folder in that folder? Let's actually do that. So there's my HTML file with that image folder. Inside of that image folder, I have another folder, and in that folder, I have my image. So now I have to just follow that path. So image folder, then there is a folder another, and then there is the folder, well, the file. And that should still work. So that would be basically the way you would do it. You will also, by the way, sometimes instead of seeing this, we'll see this syntax for relative paths. So if you do see that, this dot means current folder. So basically, in this case, the current folder would be the folder where this learn HTML file is. So that's my current folder right here. In that folder, we have that image folder. In that folder, we have that another folder, and then we have our file. So this should still work the same way. So if I save this, go back and reload, it will be working the same way. So this is if we want to do relative paths. So you can also do absolute paths. If the file is already uploaded to some server, then you could do the whole path to that server. So it would look something like HTTP or HTTPS, and then something like this. So it would be the whole domain name and then the path to the actual file. For me, I'm going to just get rid of all of this stuff. And I'm going to move my image to the same folder as my main file and just get rid of all these folders. And this should just work fine the same way. So that's a little bit about images. So as you can see, image is not a container, doesn't have opening and closing, and it has an attribute that's required, src, for it to work. We have to have a source image for this to work, otherwise it's not going to. Other tags that are not containers that are useful very often, let's actually do an h something here, h2 other tags, are input tags. So input, actually let me do this. So I build on this. So input tags, similar to images, they're not containers, so there's no opening and closing. So that's the tag. And for input tags to work, usually you'll provide the type of the tag. It's going to ask me what type of input do I want. So for example, if we do text type of input, if I save this and go back and just take a look. Scroll down, see right below here, there's this box that I can just go type something. So we can do text type of inputs. You can do a lot of different types. So you can do things like email, for example. And if you save it, go back, reload, you will see absolutely no difference when you look at this. This is going to make a difference when you load this on a mobile device. And I'm going to show you the difference by going to this mobileinputtypes.com website. So you can see they did a great job here to explain the difference. So for example, see if you do type text, you're going to get this keyboard. If you do type email, see how this keyboard changes to this thing with an email sign and the period. So it's easier to enter email. So if you do type email, that will help the user to do this. If you do type tel, it will give you this keyboard, which will help them enter a telephone number, which is this keypad for telephone. If we do a number, see we get this number keyboard on top. Compare this to this one, which is text. See, it's just text things, and here we have numbers. If you do password, it will just not show the actual letters as you type. It will just mask them. And date will give you a date picking type of thing. See, so that's pretty much why you would probably want to use this, because it's gonna help a lot with mobile device experience. So getting back to this, so there's a bunch of options here, and Visual Studio Code is great for this because when you open this, it will show you what are some possible options here. One of which, for example, is color. So if I do color and save, that will really change a lot. So see, it will give me a color picker. So if I click here, now I can just select a color from this box. And yeah, something like that. And that's going to be a little different probably depending on the browser and operating system you have too. So that's that. So I'm going to stick with just text in this case. Now you can also add some text for people to know what to type here, because by default, if you look right here in this text box, see there is some text to type, but we probably want something that tells the user what we need to do. So this is where you use the label tag, and labels are containers. So they have openings and closings, your name, something like this. And that's pretty much the text that's going to show up before that input. So if I save this, go back and reload your name, and then we have the input box. Let me copy this and paste again. So I have another one. So this will be your email, and we'll change it to type email input. And now we should have two input boxes for our users. So if I save, see, it shows up side by side. So in HTML, adding new lines here, they really don't mean anything. Like I can add more lines and save. I go back and reload. It's still going to be the same here. So you really add these lines and indentations for our own sanity so we can read our code, but it really doesn't matter. I could just put this all on the same line. It would have rendered all the same, including, by the way, all the rest of this code. It could all go on one line like this. And if I save this, I go back and reload, you'll see it's still the same. So what makes things to actually go to the next line or not to go to the next line is the display property that's assigned to that element. And I'm not going to go too much into that because that's more like CSS. However, a common element that's more like a block level element that pushes things to the next line is the division element, or divs. One of the most popular elements probably in web development. So if I take this label, for example, and I move it, you could cut and paste. I'm just going to drag it because I'm using Visual Studio Code and I can do that. Now then do another div here and then place this other input box with its label in here as well. If I save this, Division is a block level element, and block level elements will push things below by default. So if I reload this, see, now I have your name on one line, your email goes to another line. So that's our div elements. You'll see div elements a lot. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to add a div element over here as well, and just move all of this, at least those 4, right inside of that div. I'll do a tab to just indent that, so I show that this goes inside of that. And if I save this, I go back and reload, we're really not going to see much difference as far as what happens. So div elements don't really have a look or feel unless you assign them some look or feel, but they do create that illusion of having a box that's an invisible box around whatever you have. So I'm going to continue with some other HTML elements in just a little bit to add to this. But before I get to that, I want to talk again about tags, attributes, attribute values, and then also the parent and child relationship in HTML. So right now I have my containers, like this HTML is a container. Then I have head, it's a container. Head is a container that has usually some meta tags and other styles and other scripts in that. So it's usually not things that are visible for the user. So everything that's visible for the user is going to go inside of your body tag. Body, it's again a container, has opening and closing. Inside of that body, we have different elements, as you can see, bunch of stuff, one of which is this div. Now this div, in its turn, it has all of these elements in it inside of that div. And then the body has also all this other stuff in there, which then has another div, which also has all this other elements in there. Where are the parents and where are the children here? So HTML here is the main parent that's going around the whole page. In that HTML, if we think about direct child elements, we only have 2 direct child elements inside of HTML. One is head, that's direct child of that HTML. And then we have the body, which opens and closes here, which is also a direct child of HTML. Now, if I look inside of head, head doesn't have any child elements in it. Body, if we look at direct child elements, we have this div inside of that body. Then we have this h2, h3, h4, h1, this image, this h2, and then we have this div, and then we also have this other div. So those are direct children for our body element. Now, in that div element, if we look at direct children, basically it's going to be this h1, paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. Now, if I look inside of this h1, what are direct children? There are no really child elements here. We have some text, but there are no child tags. Now, if I look inside of this second paragraph, now this one actually does have some child elements. It has this B element, I element, both of which are direct children of that paragraph. So something that's in a container, that would be a child element. If it's directly inside of that container, that's a direct child. So what that means is for this body, in general, all of these are child elements, including this H1, this paragraph, B tag, this I, this label. All of them are child elements for our body, but they're not all direct children. Direct child element is only the one that's right in that element. So that's the parent-child relationship we have to understand when we look at our different tags. And if we have a tag that's not a container, like image, it cannot have any child elements because it's not a container. It doesn't have opening and closing. But what it can have is attributes. So in this case, we have the attribute, src, and then the value for that attribute is this. So why is all of that important? What is the tag? What is the attribute? What's the value for the attribute? And all of this stuff. Because when you use JavaScript, you're gonna have to use some code to go find something inside of that HTML you've built. So for example, if I go here and do an ID for that div, main box. So these IDs cannot have spaces in their names. That's why I'm using this camel casing main box. Now let me save this and go back and open Firefox. So I'm going to reload this to make sure it's open. Now, if you're on Firefox or you're in Google Chrome, you should have console easily accessible. Now, that's also going to be accessible probably on all the other browsers now, but it's probably a lot easier with Chrome and Firefox. So if I just right click and do inspect or inspect element, it's going to give me this inspector window, which basically just opens that HTML. And here, if you look here on top, we have this console screen. So this console screen, it says that encoding was not declared. I don't care about it. I'm going to clear that for now. So this will allow us to run JavaScript directly in the browser. In JavaScript, there's going to be this object document. So that document refers to your DOM. I guess document object model, that's what we call it. So that's pretty much giving you access to that HTML on that page. So if I do document, then do dot, we can see there's a lot of different methods and properties on that object in JavaScript code. But what I want to concentrate right now is this get stuff. So if I start typing get, see there's this get element by ID, get elements by class name, get elements by name, get elements by tag name, etc. Now I want you to pay attention that the ID one, it says get element, and for example the class one says get elements. It's plural, and that's going to be important. But for now, let me just do get element by ID, and then we have to provide the ID we're searching for. So if you remember when I was building this HTML, I did that ID main box. This is case sensitive, so I have to make sure I do that uppercase B. So if I go back and just do main box in quotes in JavaScript, that ID, close parentheses, basically that will allow us to search that document and find the element that has the ID main box. And if I just do a semicolon, I guess here, although it doesn't matter, and press enter, that should run the line, and see what it gives me is that div main box. And if I click here, see it opens that whole thing, and you can see what it has inside. If you look at this inner HTML, it's basically all of that stuff that's inside of that div. So including all this H1 tags, B, and everything else. So what I'm getting into is the difference between a tag and an element. So I will probably a lot of times just say element referring to a tag, or say tag referring to an element. But there is a technical difference between the two in a way, because the tag is just, see, this is the tag. So for example, this div is the tag. So the element is this thing, including all the stuff in it. So when you're getting element by ID using this JavaScript search, you're basically just getting that entire thing, including everything that's inside, all of this. And notice how I was searching by ID main box, but I'm not returning this part. I'm returning the element because we're searching the element by ID. So that's going to just find this ID main box, and it's going to say, okay, so this is it. This is this div tag, and that's going to be our element. Everything that's in it, we're going to grab by doing this. Now we can find that element also by having a class. So if I do a class cat, so I'm going to save it. So now I can go back and reload this and try to get to my console and try to do, again, document, get element, this time by, see, it get elements. There's no get element, there's get elements. Because with IDs, you can only have that ID once per page. With classes, you can actually repeat the same class for multiple elements on the page. So I named that class cat. So I'm going to do that cat and press enter. And what I'm going to get, see, it says it's an HTML collection. And that collection, see, has 0. And it says the 0 is that div, that element that we were actually looking for. And then the length is 1. So to make this a little more understandable, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to go in here and assign that same class to another element here. So we'll do that same cat for this other div. We'll also do that for this h4. Why not? So now we have 3 of them. So I'm going to save it. So if I go back and reload my browser and go to my developer's console and run that same, and I can, by the way, run the last command by just pressing the up key and press enter. See, I'm getting this HTML collection again. And in this collection, if I open it, see, it says now the length is 3. It was able to find 3 elements. And the first element is that div main box. The second element is that h4. And the third element is third div. And because in JavaScript, we start to count from 0, the first one is 0, the second one is 1, the third one is 2. Basically, out of all of these, if I just wanted to get the first one, then I could just refer to that position here by doing the square brackets, similar to how you would do the array brackets, and do the first one, 0. So if I do this, see, instead of getting that collection with multiple things, I'm just getting that first main box, which was the first one out of this cats. If I want to get the second one out of these, which is, where is it? This h4, then what I would do, I would refer to that position as 1 instead of position 0. And then it's going to get me that h4. So that's why we're doing elements. That's going to give you multiple elements in a collection-like structure. And then you can just go through that collection and find the first one, second one, third one. So see, I can find things by using the class name. I'm going to clear this. And we could pretty much use any of those get methods to find something. So we can also do get elements by tag name. So the tag name would be the actual tag, right? So the tags, for example, if I wanted to do h1, that would be like we have one h1 here, we have another h1 here. We should be able to find 2 of them. So if I go here and do get elements by tag name and do h1 as the tag, if I press enter, I should get a collection again, and it should be a collection of 2. See, length is 2, and I have one h1, which is the first h1, and then I have another h1, which is the second h1. So I'm able to get both of those h1s. And again, you could just refer to the first one by saying 0. That's the one that says title and language en, which is this one right here. So another very common way to find elements is by using this query selectors. So there's query selector and there's a query selector all. And this allows you to search using CSS syntax. So for example, in CSS, we refer to a class by doing a dot notation. So for example, the class I have here is cat. So if I want to find everything with a class cat, I can do that by doing this dot cat, because in CSS, that dot is the class notation. So if I do this and just run this, see, I'm finding the first cat. So what I'm getting is just this first one. I'm not really getting the second or the third cat, unlike the other one that we did that was document get elements by class name. I could get all of them by using query selector all method. And if I do that, if I open this, you'll see we have the first one, we have the second one, we have the third one. And again, the 0 would be the first one, 1 the second one, to third one. So we can also find elements with JavaScript on a page using CSS notation. So depending on how much CSS you know, you'll be able to use it in your advantage. So if I have an ID assigned to that H1, I can obviously just search by that ID and find it. And by the way, you can do IDs in CSS syntax by using the pound key or the, I guess we call it a hashtag now. Anyway, so let me give you an example of that. I'm going to do this query selector and then do the ID title. So that's the hashtag key is the ID. And if I do that, I'm going to find that H1. All right, so that's great. So what if we have multiple paragraphs in here? Then we also have a paragraph that's outside of this whole thing. So now I have 3 paragraphs that are inside of this div with a class cat. And then I have one other paragraph that's not really inside of that div structure. So right now, if I go and search for this query selector all, let me just clear this, and then search for P. And if you don't do the dot means you're looking for a class, pound key, you're looking for an ID. And if you don't do anything, that means you're looking for a tag. So now we're searching for that tag P. And if I press enter right now, you'll see we get a node list and we get 1, 2, 3. So I got 3 paragraphs. So if we go back to our HTML, we have 1, 2, 3. Oh, interesting. It looks like I didn't refresh my page. So I'm going to save this. Let's go and reload our page to make sure we get all the updates and do this all over again. Run that same code again. See, I got 4 now. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. Good. And total length 4 because I got 4 of them. So that's exactly what we have. We have 3 of these and we have 4. So now what I could do, I can go back and change the way I'm searching for my elements and do that same selector, but do .cat, which is the class cat, and then use this child and parent relationship by doing this space. So now I'm saying I want paragraphs that are inside of this element that has the class cat. So now if I press enter, if I go back and look at this, it's going to be, see, 3 paragraphs, not 4, because I'm only going to get these 3 paragraphs because those are the only ones inside of this class cat. Now, if we go and put, for example, a paragraph in here as well and save it, if I go back and try this again, it's still going to be 3 because that paragraph is not really inside of a class cat element. Now, I could make it inside of a class cat. So I can take this div, that's a parent of that, and give it the class cat. So now we should get 1, 2, 3. We're not going to get this one. We're going to get 4. So if I save this, let me reload this. Let's try this one more time. So I'm going to go back here and get 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we have 4 of them. Another thing that is probably useful to note here, let me actually go here and put a div around that paragraph that I just made. I have a div with a class cat. And then in that, I have label and I have div. And then in that div, I also have this paragraph. So right now, if I save this and go back and reload and run this, let's refresh and go back and reload and run this. I'm still getting 4. So I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4. Because, well, we have these 3 inside of this cat div. And then I have, well, this cat doesn't have anything, so no problem there. And in this cat, we also have this paragraph. So it's not a direct child, but it is a child, so it's still going to pick it up. So when you do this space syntax, right here to search for your elements, you're basically, you reload this. You're basically saying that I'm looking for any child that's a paragraph inside of that element that has the cat class. Now, if you only wanted direct childs, then you can do it by using this, I guess this is greater than sign. This greater than notation means I'm looking for a direct child, not just any child. So right now, if I take this and run this same thing, see, I'm getting 3, not 4, because it's only gonna get direct child elements for that cats. So for me, those are the only direct childs. This one is no longer a direct child of that div element. And if we go here and just run that without that greater than sign with just a space, we're gonna get C4. And as you're rolling over them, see, for example, the Firefox will show you in the background, like, what is that paragraph? Or at least it tries to do its best. Now, I can also do a parent-child-child sort of relationship. So I can do this selector and do something like this. So now I'm saying I want some element with a class cat, and then inside of that element, I'm looking for a div, and inside of that element, I'm looking for a paragraph. So if I run this, just one, length 1, just one element, because the only one that will fulfill that request is this one, because this is the one that has the cat class element, and it doesn't matter if this is a div or anything. We're finding that by the class cat, so that's going to be this. Inside of that, we have a div, and in that div, we have a paragraph. If you wanted to make sure that it's a direct child of the direct child, you could also do, instead of spaces, you could do that greater than signs. And that should find it as well. See, div is a direct child for this other cat class element. And then paragraph is a direct child of this div. So it works just fine. One other thing to mention is that this div doesn't really have to be a div. And really, when you're working with JavaScript, you largely don't really care what these elements are. What you simply need to understand is that we have containers or elements or things that have classes or IDs, and you're going to find that element using that. So for example, instead of the div, we can use a section, which is one of the HTML5 containers now, pretty much like a replacement for divs. So if I save this and go back and reload my HTML, it's not going to really look any different. But now if I search for that same thing, see, I'm looking for cat with div with a paragraph, I'm still going to find it because that section has the class cat. We're going to find the section by the class, and then in that section, we're going to find the div. In that div, we're going to find that paragraph. So that's the query selector methods that will allow you to just search and find things a little easier in many cases, especially if you do understand CSS. Finally, out of all of these methods, I guess I'm also gonna quickly talk about get elements by name. So see, there is the get element by tag name. We went with the HTML tag. So if we were searching for like H4, we would find H4s. But what is that get element by name? So that name is only used in cases when you have a name assigned usually to an input box. So for example, for inputs, your name, you can have the name attribute assigned to that input yn, short for your name. So now the name attribute has the value yn. So I should be able to search and find this input box by searching for that name. So if I go back here and reload this, let me open my developer's console and then do that get element by name, and the name is yn. See, I got that input by searching by name. So if you're trying to search by name, you can do that by doing this. All right, so that's a little bit about differences between elements, tags, attributes, and attribute values, and also how you go about searching and finding those elements in JavaScript. Now, one other thing I want to mention is how do you access and change attributes? So, for example, see this input right now has the attribute type, and the value for that attribute is text. So what I want to do, I want to be able to just search and find this input, and then I want to change this type attribute from text to something else. So we'll maybe just change it to like color or something like that. So if you remember, the color will give us that color box option. So to make this a little easier, I'm going to switch this to ID, so we can just search and find this thing by the ID YN. So now if I go back, save this and reload this, make sure we refresh this, open our developers console. So now we're going to search by, not name, by ID and its element, not elements. So if I do that, I press enter. Let's verify that it finds that input box. So that's good. So now that's going to find that input box. So in that input box, now we can access its attributes. One of the attributes is type. So to access attributes, you just do dot and type the name of the attribute. So that's the type attribute. And I can change that type by assigning something else to it. So instead of having what's now, so right now that type is in our HTML, if you remember, that's text. But in our JavaScript code, we can access that and change it to, for example, color. So if I press enter, let's just scroll down. So hopefully you can see, I'm going to move this out of the way. See that thing? It's now a color box. So if I go back and change this from color to, for example, text, I run that again. See, it became a text box again. So you can actually modify the attribute values by basically just finding the element and then doing dot and then typing the attribute you want to modify and switch to something else. Let's also just switch it, for example, to a button. Something like that. It made a button. It's a button now. So I can modify that by simply just accessing the attribute and changing it. So we can really access any attribute and change any attribute here. So for example, see this src is an attribute for this image. So we can go and change that src attribute, find that image and change that src to, I don't know, whatever it is we're going to change it to. Let me actually just go grab another image. So I'm going to copy an image here. Let me just paste it to here. I'm going to just rename that. So now I have, see this coconut image in that folder as well, in addition to Chicago image right here. So if I go here and take a look, you see there's the coconut, there's Chicago. Image we are using is the chicago.jpg. There's also that coconut.jpg image. I can modify that in JavaScript directly. So if I go back to this, actually let me just refresh to make sure I have the fresh version of all of this. I go to my developers console. I have to first find the image. So I can do document. We didn't do an ID for that. So I'm just going to use my query selector and find the img tag. I only have one, so this should be an easy find. There it is. There's only one image. We found that. So now I can take that, the image that I found, and modify the attribute. The attribute for that image is called src. So I'm going to go back here and type .src, and I'm going to make it equal to whatever else I want to change it to. So I'm going to change it to coconut.jpg. Press enter, and you can see how in the background we just changed our image because we're modifying the value for that attribute by doing this. I can go back now and change the coconut back to, for example, Chicago. Press enter. There it is. We're searching and finding the element. Then we're targeting the attribute we want to target, which is the src, and we're changing it to whatever we want it to be. And it just works. So the same thing could be done with hyperlinks and things like that. So for example, the hyperlink syntax is the A tag, which I believe stands for anchor. And for hyperlink to work, you're gonna have the text for hyperlink. See, it's a container tag. It has opening and closing. And for that to work, I'm actually gonna put it a lot higher in this code so we can see it above. You have to have some sort of link for that hyperlink. So that would be the hyperlink where it's going to go. And this is the text for the user. So if I save this, go back and reload this, go back and take a look. See, we have this click here. If I click on it, it's going to open Google because that was the hyperlink for this part. Now I can find that link and make changes to it again by either using IDs or any other methods of finding this. So let me actually change that so you can see how that's going to work. So right now, this click here, see, it goes to Google. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and find that hyperlink with our JavaScript. So we'll do again document object, and then we'll do our query selector probably to find just there's one link. So just the A anchor tag, the attribute that href hyperlink reference attribute. So right now, if I just do this and press enter, see, it tells us this is currently what the value for that attribute is. But we can change that value by assigning a different value to it. So we can say something like bing.com. We probably need a dot here, and I have to learn how to type actually, but there it is. So now if I press enter, I should have changed it to Bing as the value. So right now, if I go back and click on this click here, see, it takes me to a different website because I was able to go programmatically in my JavaScript, find that element in my HTML and just change the value for that attribute, which is href. Now, for that same hyperlink, this anchor tag, we have the hyperlink reference, which is a required attribute for a link to work. And you can also have something like target attribute. So target specifies where do you want this link to be opened. So right now, if you remember, when I click on this link, click here, it opens the link in the same tab. So it basically overwrites my page and it goes to Google. So I can change that by changing that target to _ blank. That will force it to be opened in a new tab. So if I save this and reload this and click on that click here, see, it's gonna just open that, but it still has other tab open. So it forces it to be opened in a new tab if you use target blank. Now I can also do this programmatically. So maybe we don't do it in here. I save it without that target blank. So right now, if I reload this and click, you'll see it's just gonna go to Google in the same tab. But now I'm gonna go to this and find the element. It was the same element, A. But now instead of modifying href, which is hyperlink reference attribute, I'm gonna find target attribute. And right now, if we look, see, it's basically nothing. We didn't specify what the value is in our HTML. But we can change that by assigning a value to it, _ blank. And now it should have assigned it to it. So now if I click on this click here, see, it opens the tab in a new tab because I was able to go back and change it in my HTML. And we can actually see that. So if you open this inspector and go to inspector instead of console, I should be able to look in that link, see that now the target became _ blank. So we can actually see that modification of our HTML in this inspector tab by looking in here. And that's a little bit about how to find and change attribute values. So for example, if I wanted to find this div with the ID main box and find out what's the value for the class attribute, which should be cat, I'm gonna find that by doing document dot get element by ID. The ID, I think I had main box with an uppercase B. Let's just test this to make sure it finds it. Yep, so it does find the element itself, but the element is the whole thing, including everything in it. Now we want to just get to that class value. So if I do dot class, which is the attribute class, we want to get the value for that. And that doesn't work because we have to do class name, not class. So there it is. So class name is cat. So we're able to go get the value. So most of the time, this attribute name will exactly match what's in here. So href or, you know, ID or type, all of these things. But once in a while, because there are some reserved words in JavaScript, like in this case, like the class, we have the class name instead. So hopefully that gives you some overview about how JavaScript does the interaction, how we can find our elements. And I'll talk about some other HTML elements in the next video. So right now we just talked about input boxes for somebody to type something in. But I also want to get to like drop downs, checkboxes, and this type of stuff. And I'll do a separate video for that. But for this one, I think that should be plenty. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.